Welcome to Grameen Foundation's podcast series, Women in Agriculture. We discuss ways in which we can transform systems, mindsets, perspectives, behaviors, and actions so that rural-based women farmers and women entrepreneurs can show up with their full power. I'm your host, Lakshmi Iyer. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Women in Agriculture podcast, episode 5. On today's episode, we'll be speaking with my colleague, Bobby Gray, Grameen Foundation Senior Research Director. You may remember her from an earlier podcast we did when we were launching the Together We Grow agriculture strategy. So, Bobby, we're so happy to have you back. Share with us your insights and your wisdom.
Yeah, excited to be here.
And you've been working on some additional analysis for project level women's empowerment in agriculture, plus market inclusion research that we started back in phase 1 of the MANDI project. So we would love to hear more about what you're finding from this additional research. As our audience members know, Dave and Garima from Grameen Foundation India on an earlier podcast, perhaps around research findings, shared some of the early findings, but really hoping, Bobby, that you'd be able to shed additional light and additional insights into what has been uncovered.
Sure, no, and thanks for inviting me back. As they shared some of this earlier research, like we kind of already had some of them, but we wanted to kind of wait and validate some of the research as we've been going along. And we're really excited that we've been working on a manuscript on this and hope to make these results, public in the next, I would say, half year. But I would say that as we wrapped up the first phase of MANDI 1, because the project is really geared towards, engaging women into farmer producer organizations or FPOs, we had the question from the research, well, who is actually joining or who is an active member of an FPO? Kind of thinking about what are the characteristics of the people that are actually joining, because I think it would help us understand how those characteristics might influence future approaches to recruitment or, retaining those members over time. So there's kind of some interesting findings that come out of this, and I'm going to separate them into what we learned about who is joining among women and then who is joining among men. So in some of the early findings that we have among women who are joining, we find that the older the woman, the more likely she's to be an active FPO member. And I'll probably need to say that when we talk about active membership, because we're using the ProWEA plus market inclusion tool that IFPRI designed specifically for the ANU project that is kind of complementary to the MANDI research that we've been doing. There's a question in the survey of, what groups do you belong to and are you an active member? And so active member has not really been established. And it's, and I think that's something that Dave and Garima mentioned during the first podcast, is that we really need to think about what does active membership actually mean and define that. So I think that's something that, we've had kind of an ongoing conversation about. But anyway, the older the woman, the more likely she's an FPO member, which makes a lot of sense within the India context, because older women tend to have a little bit more agency over decisions in their household and their life. The less poor the household, or basically the better off they are, the woman is more, a little bit slightly likely to be an active FPO member. Acreage, like the amount of land that they have, doesn't seem to matter. Her self-efficacy doesn't seem to matter, which is a little bit contradictory to what we expected. If a woman is a member of another organization, she's 4 times more likely to be an FPO member. And this was surprising because some of the qualitative data that we had early on suggested that women said, why would I be a member of an FPO when I'm already a member of like a self-help group, for example? So we actually did not anticipate this particular finding. But I think it speaks to probably agency of the woman. If she's already a member of another group, she kind of understands what the value of group membership to other organizations might be. Um, her agency in farm decisions doesn't appear to influence her active participation, which again is a little bit surprising because you would expect that, the more she feels like she has control or contribution, the more eager she might be to be part of an FPO. Another important finding is that the more time in agricultural that she spends, so like the more time she spends on the farm working, she's less likely to be an FPO member. The more time she spends on personal, domestic, and caretaking time, the more likely she's an active member. So this again was contradictory to what we expected to find, because we felt like, if she's spending more time in these, she's probably less likely to be an active member because of just lack of time. And then if she's classified as empowered using the ProWea tool, she's 9 times more likely to be an active member. So it does suggest that when you combine all the research findings on empowerment, that this is contributing to her engagement as an FPO member. So
Really
quickly,
interesting.
yeah.
Mhm.
So quickly on men, I'll just add that probably the main differences with men is that age doesn't matter. The poverty status continues to matter for men. So, like, the less poor the household, the more likely he's an active member. Acreage, agency doesn't matter. Interestingly, their self efficacy does matter, which is surprising, right? Because you would expect this to be more influential for women, but it is more influential for men. Like, how they feel about themselves determines their membership. The time that they spend in agriculture is a little less likely to influence their FPO membership, but men are almost 4 times more likely to be an FPO member if they're empowered. So the empowerment of the men still matters, just a little less so than for women. So these are kind of some of the initial findings that we found, to be really interesting when we looked at the types of characteristics that were influencing active membership.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because I think when we did speak with Dave and Garima, we had this understanding that moving into MANDI phase 2, we would try and classify active membership as women who are becoming shareholders, of course, but women who are shareholders, but also have at least 1 to 2 trades with the FPO during um, as the FPO is finding market linkages that they would sell to the FPO, and that there would be at least 1 to 2 times where they would procure from the input shop of the FPO. So active participation doesn't necessarily mean that, a woman or a man are actively attending every single meeting. I
Mm-hmm.
think what makes this really interesting is also that that point around, if a woman is an active member of another org, she is 4 times more likely to be an active FPO member. And I kind of just want to tease that out a little bit, Bobby, if we have a bit of time,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously what we see is that across self-help group, and this is largely within the context of Uttar Pradesh, we're not talking about any other state in India,
Mm-hmm.
but and specifically around the context of these particular FPOs that we're working with in Eastern Uttar Pradesh, which is that these individual women are coming from uh, societies, communities whereby many times their eyes gaze downwards when men are speaking. I just want to paint a picture of what type of patriarchal society we're kind of engaged in here.
Mm-hmm.
And Rupali suggested this a little bit in her last in the last podcast too, or
Right.
that when male member is speaking, that she, veils her hair and head, and sometimes even her face.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a drastic decision to become a women shareholder when you have nothing to fall back on and you don't have a women group that you could fall back on to provide you the type of support that you might need to do that. So I just wanted to
Mhm.
flavor that a little bit, perhaps, if that helps for the audience to know the type of context that we're in.
Right. Well, and the other reflection that I've had on this is that, when we started this project, we, if I remember correctly, we had established some criteria as to the types of FPOs that we would work with. So none of the FPOs are really mature, right? Like they're still kind of in these early
Yes.
phases. They've had
Yeah.
some initial investment, but they're kind of in that they're still in that trajectory of professionalizing, which is part of what Grameen has been trying to do is professionalize more of their services so that they can grow and can provide more value to the men and women of the communities that they're supporting. So to me, that's also a reflection here that what we're picking up on is likely the low hanging fruit, like the women who in the beginning you're going to recruit women who are already active because they already have some confidence. They know how to be a member of a group, they know the value, and they probably feel a little bit more confident to join. But it's also because if they're already a member of another group, then there's already some enabling environment within their household that facilitates their ability to become a member, of another group. Interestingly, when you look back at the savings group research, what they found when they looked across all of the initiatives that were building savings groups from the beginning is that they were the better off women in the community who joined. And so there was kind of an impression that over time you would expect to see savings groups reach poor women in the community who had a little bit less money to participate. It may also mean that one of the things that Rupali mentioned in her last podcast about the importance of the cost of the shares that the women have to purchase is actually an issue. If you look at the results here and you see that both she's already a member of another group, so she may be generating income from being part of a self-help group or some other sort of group, and the fact that her household is less poor also means she has more money to join an FPO, as well. And so I think those are two, implications that we just have to think about. And you would hope that over time, FPOs, they would deepen their outreach to community members. Like I think it's natural to expect that the better off, the more well connected are going to be your early adopters. And it's, really a
Yes.
strategy that the FPO needs to continue to deepen their outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost as if in this phased approach of this particular project, the self-help group women are somewhat of that porthole for the FPOs to start thinking about how they might want to be better, be more inclusive, and have business plans that are more aligned for women and women shareholders so
Mhm.
that they can continue to add more value. But that's just one implication, Bobby, of the work with FPOs based on some of these findings, and that we are actively um, focusing and centering in on building that bridge between FPOs and SHGs now, much more so than we did in MANDI 1. Just wondering what you think are some of the other implications of these findings on our work, or perhaps
Mhm.
anybody's work within the realm of FPOs.
Mhm. I think the other, important implication is this issue of the more time that men and women are spending in agricultural activities, the less likely they are to be an FPO member, which tells me that, if they don't have time to be there because they're out in the field, um, if FPOs are recruiting among that particular, I mean, this is the population they're recruiting among, right? Like they're trying to recruit farmers to be part of the FPO, that they're really going to have to think about how do they create value such that a man or a woman can decide that when I leave my farm for this hour or for these 2 hours, whatever the length of time the meetings may be, the interactions with the FPO may need, that the FPO really has to create value. And so I know, Mandy, the MANDI 1 and 2 phases of this project have really been, focusing on that value creation, whether it's through helping make these market linkages, bring in the inputs at better prices, et cetera, trying to come up with women friendly, technologies that will draw them in. Like, it's really important that those, whatever those interventions are, create enough value that a man or a woman who's working on their farm is willing to walk away. And, there's an opportunity cost, right? Like, if they leave their farm, that it needs to create value. So I think that's something that, to me, is one of the other, just interesting findings that we found. I think the other one I'll just mention, and I think it still goes back to this issue of, women's participation. What was surprising when you see the finding that, the more time that they have to spend in personal time, caretaking time, et cetera, that women are more likely to be an FPO member. Like, this is the one that was really contradictory, because so much of the literature talks about, caretaking time takes you away from other activities that you might have. But in this case, it's suggesting that the more time she can spend in caretaking, the more likely she is an FPO member. And I think the reflection that we've had on this is that, this is like the space she has for flexibility. Like, maybe as she's on the farm, she doesn't have a lot of flexibility as to when she can leave the farm, because the household is dictating like what work needs to be done. But the time that she has for herself, for caretaking, that is the only space that she has that, there's a little bit of flexibility. She can decide, well, I'm not gonna go work, I'm gonna use it my own example, I'm not gonna go work out, or I'm not gonna spend so much time cooking, or maybe I can ask my sister or my mother-in-law to, help with some of these other activities, and I'll go, participate in the FPO. So I think that's kind of an interesting contradictory finding that has an implication. Is, I think on the whole, it's this issue of the FPO better create value, because time is valuable to people, no
Yes.
matter what direction you're coming from.
Such a powerful kind of insight. It's a really powerful insight, because I think what we're actively supporting the FPOs to do within MANDI 2 as well is to really think deeply and proactively about the types of technologies, inputs, products, services that they actually have, not only at their input shop, but also at these farm machinery banks that they have, because this adding value equates back, as you're saying, Bobby, to a reduction of time for women, reduction of time on their farmland, reduction of time in caretaking responsibilities, anything that would reduce their time in these drudgery filled types of spheres of their life is really what they're seeking, as well as an opportunity to elevate their voices, as we heard from Rupali's podcast as well, that they're really interested in elevating their voices as well. And so the FPO giving them an opportunity to do both, rent out a seed sorter, or rent out an implement, or procure chili pluckers, or hair nets that would support them as they're, working in green chili fields. All of this we envisage would actually reduce time, would reduce drudgery, would be somewhat of a alleviation of the economic poverty that these women are often facing as well. So it's a very, very important insight. Thanks for bringing that up, Bobby. I wonder if there's more to reflect on here with respect to Rupali's podcast, because she does talk about the importance of the dialogues as this kind of like a marketing strategy almost, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to sit in on one last week when I was in India, and really kind of supporting the FPO to make a case for women's participation more. And Rupali suggested that as well in her podcast, that the dialogues kind of take on the life of their own. Women really have to be have to really suggest that they want to be a part of it, and it comes out in the dialogue. There are some women that really want to be a part of the FPO and some do not. So it's almost as if in the dialogue itself, we begin to see a segmentation of women that are sitting around the circle, determining whether or not they want to be a member of the FPO. And then the questions flow from there. What am I going to gain as a benefit from it? Will my family support me in it? Et cetera, et cetera. So
Mhm.
I didn't know, Bobby, if there was anything that you wanted to reflect on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of our concerns all along, especially because we're entering into some gender and social norms that are pretty difficult, right? Because we are in a highly patriarchal society. Women don't leave their houses that often. And so you're trying to invite them to a space that is male dominated. And that's, I think she's looking at it from the perspective of both what benefit am I going to get, but what are going to be the repercussions of my membership, when I go. We've been doing a lot of research on economic and financial abuse, recently within Grameen, and I think it's provided us an additional platform to think about the actual risks. And recently just read a research paper for Rajasthan and Maharashtra, which in some cases have some similar dynamics. And you see that as women, are invited to participate or start to become a little bit more economically active, that the threat that the male members, and I would say even in India, it's the extended family, like the in laws, because women tend to live with their husbands' families. um, there's two things that can happen. One, she's going to submit herself more, because if she does want to be a member and she's not already active in some of these other spaces, and she kind of hasn't already overcome this particular kind of norm or um, issue within her household where she really doesn't have permission to leave without somebody in the household giving her that, permission. She's kind of thinking about, well, how, if I want to be a member, what am I going to have to do to kind of maintain the balance of power? So she may become even more submissive. And then on the other hand, the household members, as she is, entering into these more public spaces, are equally potentially going to become even more I don't want to say abusive, but they will become
Harsh.
yeah, or more controlling. Like,
Yeah.
okay, fine, you can be a member, you get to
Yeah.
go be part of this male dominated space, but when you come home, we're going to remind you what your place is. And this research was kind of
Mhm.
pointing to this particular dynamic. So I think this has been kind of an ongoing concern and conversation, that we've been having within this project is it's not just an issue of we don't want, women's roles within FPOs to just be token positions, because there is that risk, right? Like we can bring them in, but are we creating value and are we building their agency to become leaders within those organizations? But we also have to be concerned that, some of the reasons why women may not join or that they may join, but we don't want these unintended consequences to be occurring at home and not be aware that there's the potential for that. So I think, as we continue to do some of this work, this will be an area that we'll want to, really either develop stronger processes or tools to help mitigate, these potential risks.
Absolutely. Yeah, you bring up such a great point, Bobby, and that's kind of this do no harm principle that Grameen Foundation has always had, as one pillar of our gender work that we do. And I think it speaks volumes when you see something like that written in black and white,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing very well that there might be things happening behind the scenes that we're not able to really see, and that are intangible for us as we work through a project within a specific time frame. So,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly are those repercussions? It's almost as if we need to move slower, be more methodical, and very really aim to ensure that we're not doing harm at every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. And I think it
So
also means ensuring that you're adding questions in the qualitative research or quantitative research that actually picks up on this. Like the ProEA right now has questions on gender-based violence, and we didn't include those indicators in here because we were trying to think of characteristics that had to do more with this time issue because of some of the early research, that we'd already done that kind of spoke to this importance of time allocation and time use. But the instrument itself does not ask people about any series of unintended consequences, right? Like we can't really say from this research, but what we can do is pick it up qualitatively, which I think, Rupali's experience of doing the diaries is she's able to observe some of these dynamics and kind of anticipate some of these. But I do think going forward, some of the research that we're doing needs to be more inclusive of some of these unintended consequences so that it's not just wanting to know if it's occurring, but also using that information to think about how could you mitigate some of these unintended consequences in your recruitment strategy once women are engaged in the FPO, like what are the potential risks in her being, at the FPO itself, or some of the things that I think in, any sort of future programming we'd want to deepen some of the activities that we have around this.
Yeah, that's really great, Bobby. I mean, I think the last thing that I'll just say on this is that, as an individual centered in on project indicators and targets and these types of, elements within the project, it's almost as if it behooves us to ensure that we're slowing down on purpose
Mm-hmm.
and that we're really taking into consideration who we are working with and thinking very deeply about that on a regular basis as we move forward into the realm of, measuring the number of shareholders or the percentage of shareholders across each of these FPOs being women, or ensuring that there's a certain amount of percentage of these women on these FPO boards. There's
Right.
just
Yeah.
a real, pressure from that angle, but this is real life.
Right.
we
Right.
really need to be very conscious about everything that we're doing.
Right. I mean, I think if we could go back and redesign the MANDI project,
Mhm.
I think building in that additional time. So, there was a big push for the recruitment to increase female board membership as well as just stakeholder or being a shareholder of the FPOs. Like, I think if we could go back, it would be a question of, do you go ahead and create the products and services and have them available before you even start recruiting women and female shareholders so that you can actually say, this is what we already offer and this is what we think this benefit can bring to your household, and then take a really slow approach to recruitment? I mean, I'm not sure that we definitely didn't design MANDI 1 to pick up on the unintended consequences of that active and pretty aggressive recruitment strategy. But I think, what we understand, and we understood it at the time, it's just the project was already pretty complicated. So you've got a lot of moving targets. But I do think if you could, kind of go back, it would, you would have to negotiate with your project designers, your donors, et cetera, to emphasize the importance of this kind of slow approach to recruitment so that you can ensure along the way that you're doing everything you can to create benefit, but also reduce the risks that, she's facing some negative consequences at home for her recruitment.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bobby. Yeah. Thank you. With that, I think we'll end this podcast. Lots of really great insights, Bobby. Thank you for being with us again. Hope to have you on another few.
Yeah, no,
Moving
thanks
forward.
for the invite. It was fun spending a Friday with you.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.